Can I tell you our origin story? And I think it'll give you a little bit.
Oh, that'd be excellent. Well, does it involve a radioactive spider?
This Up to Speed podcast is made possible by Legislative Solutions. Legislative Solutions knows New Hampshire's politics inside and out. With years of experience and a results-driven approach, they're the go-to team for anyone looking to make an impact at the State House. Find them at legislative-solutions.com.
I'm Michael Graham with New Hampshire Journal. Welcome to Up to Speed, where we ask movers and shakers in New Hampshire to bring us up to speed on what's going on in their corner of the economy, public policy, and life in general. Steve Saltzman is the head of the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. I want to get that right, Steve, because I'll be honest with you, I didn't know what the Community Loan Fund was. I didn't know what a community development financial institution was. And then I found out about you, and we're so glad to have you here on Up to Speed.
Hey, thanks for having me, Michael. Looking forward to speaking with you.
So first of all, bring our listeners and viewers up to speed on what the heck you do with this Community Loan Fund.
No, thanks. We're a 41-year-old organization. We're a lender, and our goal is to bring people into the financial mainstream. The bulk of our lending is to help people buy homes and to make them affordable. We also do some small business lending. But we really exist to try to take people that aren't bankable and get them bankable. So a win for us is whenever somebody refinances a loan with us with an area bank, that's how we know we've been successful. Can I tell you our origin story? And I think it'll give you a little bit.
Oh, that'd be excellent. Well, does it involve a radioactive spider? I just want to know that.
It does not involve a radioactive spider, but 41 years ago, there was a manufactured housing park in Meredith, New Hampshire. There were 13 homes there. And the owner was elderly and was going to sell to a hotel developer. And so those 13 people who owned their homes, they didn't own the land underneath. We're going to have nowhere to go because a hotel was going to be built there. So we organized a cooperative, put them into a co-op, and they bought the park. And for 41 years, they've been running it themselves. And the lot rent for them is very inexpensive. When you own a manufactured house, you own your home, but you don't own the land underneath, so it's never secure. Well, since then, we've organized 151 cooperatives in the state of New Hampshire. And it's become a model that's been copied across the country because it's considered the best affordable home ownership program that doesn't require any subsidy. And manufactured houses today are built to a super high standard. So if you think about, I don't know, that person who works in the fire department, or that person who's just graduated from college is trying to buy their starter home, this is how they get it. Or if you have an aging parent, it's single level living. It's affordable, and it's 30 yards from their neighbor. It really becomes an amenity. But about 20 years ago, we learned that people who, it was one thing to help people buy the parks. But we found that the mortgages for them were really difficult, that they were often being financed like jet skis. So for 20 years, we made what we think are the first 30-year fixed-rate mortgages for people to buy a manufactured house at a standard rate. And what's interesting is our average credit score is a 620, and our default rate is less than 2%. And actually this year, it's even less than 1%. And these are all people who are building financial stability and using that to build equity and going on to build a more prosperous life. We also do lots of small business lending.
Well, let's stop there, and we'll get to the small business part, but you've given us a lot to work with. I want you to talk for a second about what it means to be bankable and what it does for New Hampshire's economy to get the unbanked, as I've heard them called, the people who are whatever. Well, you're going to explain who they are and then why it helps the overall economy to get them from the unbanked to the banked.
It's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of people that could fall into that category, and they could be young. They could be someone who's had a medical collection. There are any number of reasons why people don't, but the whole idea is there's lots of private capital, and how do you leverage it? And how do we take advantage of it? Because, there's philosophically, our organization believes New Hampshire is better when we're a state of homeowners and a state of business owners, not a state of renters and a state of employees working for a corporation in some other state. That's just, we're philosophically, that's how we're oriented. So over the course of my lifetime, and this is going to sound really wonky, banks have gotten bigger through consolidation.
Right.
And they've gotten more profitable and they've gotten more efficient through consolidation. What that means is they'll say, we're going to make a loan to anybody, any project that has an 80% loan to value or lower. Or we're going to make a mortgage to anybody with a 640 credit score or higher.
Right.
Well, we make a loan to that person with a 639. Or we'll make a loan to that organization that has an 85% loan to value project. Mm-hmm. And it's not that the projects are incompetent or they're silly, it's just that they don't fit the parameters that the consolidation of banking requires. But, after someone's with us for a few years, we can get them into the financial mainstream and get them to refinance with a local bank. And every time one of our loans gets refinanced, we get to churn that money around and lend it to that school teacher's trying to buy their first home, or that senior that's downsizing and wants to buy a home. So we get to constantly circulate that money. And what's interesting about the Community Loan Fund, it's called the Community Loan Fund, our capital that we lend out to people comes from people like you. People like you lend us money, we pay you interest, or we re-lend it to somebody else. And the rates that we pay have generally been really flat, and the rate we charge our borrowers are really flat. Mm-hmm. So while bank rates go up and down, we tend to be really, really steady. So more than 600 people in New Hampshire and foundations and whatnot and hospitals have lent us money that we re-lend to other people in New Hampshire. It's a whole little financial ecosystem. But the real strength that we have is our partnerships with all the area banks. A couple of years ago, when bank rates were really low, we made a real concerted effort to go out to all our co-ops and get them to refinance at local banks. Because whenever they did that, those resident-owned communities, those people who owned their manufactured housing parks, it dropped their lot rents. Mm-hmm. So our banking partners in New Hampshire really came to bat for us and did a great service for the more than 9,000 families living in these resident-owned communities across the state.
Right. So I want to do you once again. You've given us a lot to work with. I want you to tell the story of someone that your bank chose to lend to that was what's the polite term? Untraditional, non-traditional lender. Someone either the project was kind of unusual or the part bar, so that people can kind of get a grasp of the difference between someone who just might get a loan, who might have some issues with their credit score, versus the people that you're trying to help.
Yeah, there are so many examples. I'm going to give you some that I don't think fit the mental image that I think you have.
Right.
There was I won't mention them by name just for confidentiality. But there was a big housing developer in the state who had a project they were going to develop near the coast. As you might understand, permitting in the state can take a long time.
Yes, it can.
This is why Governor Aon is trying to do all this reform with the help of the legislature. Right. So in that period in which the project took to get permitted and was ready to go, the cost escalated. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about a $20 million project that suddenly had a $1 million gap. And remember, banks have their limit.
Right.
Well, this is a great project. New Hampshire needs housing. Sure. We believe in home ownership, but this is good rental housing. And we let that last $1 million to fill the gap. That's subordinate to the banks. So all those banks that were lined up to finance this project, the thing was stalled unless we could come in and do that last mile. Mm-hmm. Well, if you think about, the 200 people that now have extra housing units part of the state, to me, that's a super big win.
And not just that, but the housing that they left to move into this new housing that created more kind. And that's the part of the housing stream that I don't think people get. It's not, they think it's like a cul-de-sac, and it's not. You got to keep the inventory moving because it creates new inventory.
Exactly. No, exactly. I mean, we've also done lending to people to, I talked to someone that you and I both know in common. And he was talking about a 22-year-old just graduated from college who's buying their first home. And he bought a manufactured house, the starter home of today.
Sure.
And in this 22-year-old, instead of paying rent, they're building equity.
Sure. Absolutely. Okay,
and they're doing it in a resident community where that lot rent is fixed. So they don't have that payroll. It's a new home, so it's energy efficient, so their utility bills aren't going to be crazy. it's a much better situation than you and I experienced when we were 22-year-olds.
So you've used the phrase manufactured home several times. I grew up in rural South Carolina, so it is not an unfamiliar term to me. The number of my family members who live in mobile homes is it's not insignificant. And I also, because I moved to New England, 20 years ago, I know there's a lot of inbuilt prejudice that they hear a manufactured home, they think trailer park, they think tornado, that's just where they are. So talk a little bit about what the manufactured home customer and market really are like in New Hampshire and how significant it is for our state.
I know we have two Southerners here.
Exactly.
Manufactured homes in New Hampshire. I think there are two situations.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever heard that expression, no one washes a rental car? Well, if you think about manufactured housing parks, trailer parks, when they're owned by absentee owners, rents go up, but there's a lot of deferred maintenance.
Right.
And then the people who have their homes there, it's hard to invest. But when you go around the state, realize a third of the manufactured housing parks in New Hampshire are now owned by the residents. It's night and day. Right. The landscaping, the care that people take,
sure.
They invest in their communities. And I think that's really, so I think there is definitely a class of parks that fit that stigma, and it's earned. But when residents own the parks, everybody in the community benefits. If you talk to the mayor of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and talk about how we did a lot of work with the city to help put 6 new homes 2 miles from downtown, where the most expensive home was $160,000 in Portsmouth.
Right.
Pave the roads,
right.
Work to get CDBG grants so that we could put in new water lines.
Right.
They create this essential housing stock that I think is really an amenity. So I think it is the manufactured housing you and I knew as young people growing up in the Deep South doesn't bear resemblance to the modern manufacturing techniques that you see today, where they're much more efficient, airtight, and built to a much higher standard.
But I also assume that when you talk about bringing a group of the homes into a park or whatever, that there's an immediate backlash to their concerns in the cities or towns, what's going on here. I assume you have to help people process this information, yes?
I would say this, across the state, now that you have 151 resident-owned communities,
right?
I think that's the difference. I think mayors and county people know that when the residents own the communities, the upkeep is really high. Remember, the people who live in these parks, these are people's aging parents. These are people's children. This is the person who's working in your fire department. This is the person who's working in that child care center. That, if you want employers to be able to retain their employees and not have them move, there's got to be a housing stock where people can start building financial wealth and create generational stability where they can age in place. There's definitely a role for low-income rental housing.
Right.
But philosophically, as I said before, we think when home ownership rates increase,
right,
you benefit. Every study we've ever seen says when home ownership rates rise, kids do better at school.
Mm-hmm.
Crime is less.
Right.
There are fewer divorces. There are all these indices of social health that improve for you and I, whether we're living in a manufactured home or not. Right. So I really do think it's the starter home of today.
So now let me ask you about the other end of it, which is the people who are investing in you, the people where you get the money from, because you mentioned those people like me, and I hope it's not, because, I don't have a lot of money. I hope that there are some other larger players who are involved. And are there people who come to you out of a combination of business, they know they're going to get paid back, but also the kind of eleemosynary, the idea of the kind of people that you are helping are people we want to help too, so we want to do well while doing good?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the people who invest in us, I think our investments range from $1,000 to $5 million.
Wow.
And everybody's been repaid for 41 years. Mm-hmm. And when you think about these resident communities, not a single co-op has failed in the state of New Hampshire for 5 years.
That's amazing.
So, I mean, it's a very stable investment.
Sure.
And I think what happens is the idea is that by the Community Loan Fund is that there were people of resources that cared about New Hampshire. And there were people in New Hampshire that needed access to capital so that they could start a business, buy a home, open a childcare center. But they didn't fit that box that a bank had. As banks consolidated and their credit boxes got tighter and more efficient. Well, that's how we work, is that we're the conduit between the people of resources and the people who need access to capital. And, we have such a diverse range of investors now, it constantly circulates. I would say we're not really a good fit for that person who's chasing the highest rate today and constantly switching. The people who invest with us tend to invest with us for decades, because the money just keeps accruing interest and it keeps getting circulated. I think it's fantastic when people donate to charities. But that's usually a one and done.
Right.
When people invest in the Community Loan Fund, that money keeps circulating. Not only does when one borrower refinances with a bank, do we get to lend it to another borrower, but the money keeps circulating within the state. We have a real local New Hampshire first sort of mentality about us. And that's really, if you think about what's really the underneath thesis of the organization, it's really neighbors helping neighbors. It's a very community-focused project.
Well, I just want to give you credit for not having invoked the name of George Bailey at any point in this conversation. Thank you, because I absolutely hate that movie. But it's a long story.
And I've never seen it.
You've never seen It's a Wonderful Life?
No, it's funny. I've never seen The Big Lebowski. I've not seen the Blues Brothers.
Oh, whoa. Now you're drifting out into the, I don't know that we can take you credibly anymore. But
horribly deficient in my television.
No, don't see It's a Wonderful. I don't see it. But the premise of the community lending and the community helps community and everyone benefits, we all see the pieces of that. At the same time, the government, whether it's federal or state, have tended to use their ability to regulate banking for what they consider desirable outcomes, either economic outcomes, social outcomes. I remember I was doing talk radio in Massachusetts during the 2008 crisis. And there was a small regional bank down in southeastern Massachusetts that had just months before the whole shebang, collapse, had gotten a letter basically saying, "You're too solvent. All of your loans are coming in, and your risk of loss is very low, and it's because you're not making enough high risk loans." Now, the risk, the issue wasn't the risk, the issue was rather demographic. So we have certain groups, income, race, etc. And your portfolio doesn't have enough of the people in this group. And therefore we want you to, now obviously that letter read very differently, after the stock market collapsed and Lehman collapsed and we had to dump trillions of US dollars into banks to keep them open. And my question is twofold. One is there a public policy overlap with what you're trying to do? Does the state, do banking regulators, how much influence do they have on what you do? How many guidelines do they have? And secondly, do you think there is a natural place where your mission and the mission of public policymakers are likely to overlap just naturally, and where you see opportunities where they could help you do more through the way they treat you, how you're regulated, et cetera?
Well, I'll answer the last question at the end. We'll just assume you're the genie is going to give me 3 wishes, and I'll tell you what I'd like.
Well, he is.
I think if you do community development work, it's slow and it's patient, and I think you have to stand apart from politics, and you've got to assume that you've got to do your thing whether there's government involvement or not. I just don't think it works if your organization depends on the priorities of government. I think it's a losing proposition. Right. I mean, we have to rely on the people of New Hampshire. We have to rely on our banking partners, and create that ecosystem, and we have to do what we say. And I give this message whenever I talk to a new nonprofit leader is funding streams change, but your values don't. What is the work you want to do? And, politicians have different priorities. And I don't begrudge them that. The public policy question is a different one. We are regulated by the Department of Treasury. We also are rated by a rating agency called NERIS that investors can see. Right. And I think we're not required to do that, but I want our more than 600 investors to have 100% transparency about every single thing we're doing with every penny we receive. And I just don't think you're going to have enough daylight. The sort of questions that you're asking is, there are laws that our government has about fair lending practices that we follow.
Sure.
But as a matter of course, we want to lend everybody in the state. Like, I think if you look at to be blunt, I think if you look at the demographics of our borrowers, there are probably a lot of New Hampshire Journal subscribers are probably overly represented in our poll.
Sure.
We deal with all that, especially, we have a huge population of mortgage borrowers that are 55 and over living on fixed incomes and living in rural areas. So I'm not trying to ignore your question, but I think our work really stands apart from all of that. But I do think there is policy. I would say, would it help us? No, I think it really helps the state of New Hampshire. If you think about Representative Joe Alexander, who I think has been a very strong advocate for affordable housing and for manufactured housing, he is led on a bill called House Bill 685, which I think is an incredibly important piece of legislation, which is going to allow manufactured houses to be placed by right on any piece of land in the state. If I could dream, I would hope that the Senate would kind of say...
Well, that's the question I was going to ask. So we're going to put you on the spot here. You get one bill. I'm going to loan you my magic wand. It only works one time. You get one bill that the House and Senate will pass and Governor Ayotte will sign into law. What's it going to be, Steve?
I want three. But I want House.
Let's start with the one, and then we'll look at who else is on the bench, because I really want people to take away the priority.
685.
Okay, what's that?
Joe Alexander, 685, allowing manufactured housing to be placed by right in the state.
Okay.
And my hope is that the Senate will look at it and say, why are we just doing manufactured homes? Why not manufactured housing parks anywhere in the state?
Okay.
Where there's land by right. That would increase the supply of starter homes, affordable homes that people could own for seniors in the state, and that would solve the problem. If you look, if someone takes a clear-eyed look at manufactured housing parks that are owned by the residents, these resident communities, I think it's hard to argue that it isn't an amenity for every community where they exist. And again, it goes back to that tired cliche of no one ever washes a rental car.
Right.
Let's create a state of homeowners. Will Michael Graham allow me two more wishes? Or at least
so if let's say that you did get them, what would they be?
Well, let me give you another one. I would like to have a New Hampshire first policy about manufactured housing parks. That if you sell a manufactured housing park to someone else in New Hampshire, maybe you get a tax credit on maybe the transfer fee or maybe the business profit tax. But our biggest problem is that we have out-of-state private equity firms coming in and buying these parks, jacking up the rent and doing no maintenance, and they're basically pushing out a lot of our seniors out of this housing, and these seniors have no place to go. So I would say, let's tax the crud out of those out-of-state private equity firms, and let's do a tax credit with this New Hampshire first if you sell a house to another entity in New Hampshire, whether it's another park owner or whether it's the residents themselves. And I think that would make a tremendous difference. And the third one.
Well, let me stop you there, because one of the objections, there are obviously a lot of objections you can raise, property rights, etc. But one of the objections is there's a real concern that the focus on the corporate ownership of property, home properties, etc., is there are people who say this is the wrong way to look at it. If you can get BlackRock to build apartments or houses or whatever, we need people to think, if I invest money in New Hampshire in housing, I'm going to make money, which is going to make more people invest money in housing. You need the virtuous circle. This is the problem that some people argue with the premise of rent control, which is, if you're going to rent control someone's property, then why the heck would they build more property? You've just said to them, this is what you can do, and that's it. And so they'll take their money elsewhere where they can earn more. It's not just enough that you say, well, you were able to earn 3%. That's the point. Isn't that I earn 3%? The point is, there's a guy down the street offering me a deal where I can earn 7%. So why would I give you any of my money? So what is your response when people say, whoa, we want out-of-state capital involved because we want more capital, period, because we've got such a deficit for housing?
I think it's a great argument.
Well, thank you.
I think, it's funny. Every time someone decries gentrification, you don't have gentrification without investment.
Right.
I mean, it's absolutely essential that we bring more investment into the state. But I think with this critical housing stock, you can see what happens when we have out-of-state private equity firms buying these manufactured housing parks, is that it works to the detriment of homeowners in the state of New Hampshire. And I'm always going to prioritize keeping capital in the state. And I understand you saying that maybe we don't penalize out-of-state private equity firms, but I'd certainly like to incentivize people to sell it to the residents or sell to another New Hampshire park owner. If you look at the conduct of park owners in New Hampshire versus those that are out of state, New Hampshire park owners are much better. This is, we know each other in New Hampshire. This is the state where people stop to help get someone else out of the ditch when there's a snowstorm.
Absolutely.
We're the state where people go up in snowstorms to rescue each other in the White Mountains. I just think we need a New Hampshire first policy. But I'm never going to shy away from inviting investment in the state. But I think the better role for that is with rental housing. When it comes to home ownership, let's keep it in-state. Let's keep it local.
So what's your third desire, assuming that they're really working the bench? They got plenty of playing time. Let's go for it.
No, I think you're hearing a lot of people talk about it in this session of the legislature and the general court. One state, one code.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And you're as eloquent.
Well, we've talked about it before, but why don't you go ahead and lay out what it means for you, and then how it applies particularly for you with manufactured housing, because I would assume there's one code.
Yeah, well, it's not really relevant to us. It doesn't really impact manufactured housing, but it affects development in the state. That we don't have to do it to think that it's important for the state.
Right.
To have uniformity when you go from county to county and city to city in terms of housing codes. It's going to make it much easier for development. Manufactured housing, I think, is incredibly important for people to build equity and for people to have stability and home ownership. But it's not right for everyone, and it's not right for every jurisdiction and every zip code. We need a lot of solutions for housing that involves rental housing, that involves, single-family homes that are stick-built, like decreasing the acreage for those, as some of the legislation is proposed. These are really critical things that are going to create density. There are some people that want to live on a mountaintop and not see another neighbor. There's also a lot of people that benefit from living that enjoy the density of neighborhoods. And we want to be able to support both in the state. But I think if you can create, one state with one housing code, I think it's going to make things a lot easier for housing developers. And that really doesn't impact us as an organization, but I think it's good for the state.
So in the years that you've been doing this, and you weren't there for the first one at 41 years, I assume.
I may look like I was, but I was not there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What is one of the smartest things that you've had someone tell you about how New Hampshire really works? Is there a conversation you've had or a comment someone made that you find yourself going back to again and again?
Man, that is a great question. I'm just reflecting on so many of the things, that I've heard about humility. I mean, what I'll just share is a funny story. It's before I moved here, one of my neighbors told me, he said, the thing you need to know about New Hampshire is when someone buys a new car, they usually buy the same model and the same color as the old ones. The new one bought a new car. Because this is the kind of place that you're going to get to. I mean, I think for you and I that come from the South, I mean, New Hampshire is just wonderful by how unpartisan it is.
Yep.
I mean, I live in a neighborhood about a mile from my office, and I can't tell you how any of my neighbors vote.
Right.
I can't tell you what church or whatever religious thing they may go to. But I'll tell you, a tree falls through my neighbor's a roof during a big windstorm. Everybody's out there on ladders in the storm, so with their chainsaws cutting away the tree.
Right.
I mean, and this is a special place, and I think that's why I have such a parochial New Hampshire first sort of mentality, is to protect this.
I think it's because you lived in Charleston, South Carolina, which is maybe the most parochial place on the planet, and that you caught it there. So now we're going to wrap up with my final question. your favorite place to eat on the peninsula in Charleston?
I'm gonna give you three answers.
What is this? Okay.
If it's you and me having a talk like this,
Right.
we're gonna go meet at Oak.
Okay.
And sort of have a talk, Oak down on Broad, and and really meet with other people that are just like us and really get into this conversation. If it's Saturday and I'm with my boys, we're gonna go to Rodney Scott's.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Get some chops, get some collards,
absolutely, yes.
get cold beer. If I'm with the bride, she and I are going to go to Chubby Fish in Cannonboro, small place.
I don't know that place.
It's the best restaurant in Charleston right now. But I would only do that if I'm with the bride.
I just took my lovely bride to Magnolia's for the first time, and it was absolutely, she'd never done it before, just absolutely great. I'm a Hanks guy too, so that's, can't go wrong.
You can't go wrong there.
No, you can't. And so the chance for us to sit here and talk about Charleston, South Carolina is just absolutely a blast. And I will tell you the one thing that you need to know about South Carolina, which was said by a state legislator in 1861, too small for a republic, too large for an insane asylum. And I will say that on occasion, I've had that same thought about New Hampshire. I have to admit, on occasion, I have. Well, Steve Saltzman, thanks so much for joining us and bringing us up to speed about what's going on in your world here in New Hampshire. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Michael. It's great to be here.
This Up to Speed podcast is made possible by Legislative Solutions. Legislative Solutions knows New Hampshire's politics inside and out. With years of experience and a results-driven approach, they're the go-to team for anyone looking to make an impact at the State House. Find them at legislative-solutions.com.